The floods and destruction are unimaginable. We cannot even assess the scale of the damage yet, says Carolyn Weitzel, the mayor of Erfstadt, a town in North Rhine-Westphalia, NRW, southwest of Cologne. Blessem, a part of her city, was evacuated after a landslide spreading from a nearby quarry created a huge crater that reached the edge of the town. Part of its historic castle collapsed. Streets were smashed and covered with water and mud. Cars were carried away by the torrents and turned upside down. The contents of family homes became piles of muddy rubbish. Even the crosses at the local cemetery were submerged underwater. Erfstadt was one of the settlements hit most dramatically by the devastating floods in Europe that have cost more than 200 lives in Germany, Belgium, and the Netherlands, with the toll still rising. In NRW, at least 48 people have died. And in the district of Ahrweiler in Rhineland-Palatinate alone, at least 122 have died. Across the country, 160 more people are still missing and now feared dead. So far, Erfstadt is not mourning any deaths, but not all its inhabitants have been accounted for. As the worst floods in Germany's post-war history subside, the finger-pointing has started. The disaster has also moved climate change to the heart of debate in the run-up to the general election due on September 26. Other than the hard-right alternative for Germany, all political parties agree that man-made global warming is to blame. Naturally, the Greens have long focused on promoting measures to tackle climate change. But in their reaction to the catastrophe, they were careful not to seem to profit from tragedy. Opposition politicians are now calling for the resignation of Horst Seehofer, the federal interior minister, because of what they say was the government's failure to give people enough warning. Hannah Cloak, a hydrologist at the University of Reading, who co-founded the European Flood Awareness System, EFAS, developed by the European Commission in the wake of severe floods in 2002, says that the forecasting was adequate, but the response to the warnings of local authorities was highly inconsistent. Under Germany's decentralized system, city and county councils in the 16 states are in charge of natural disaster prevention. So it was up to them to act upon EFAS warnings, which Germany's meteorological service indeed passed on several days before the disaster struck. In part owing to a reluctance to order evacuations, and the assumption that messages through digital tools would work, officials, media, and the public in many affected areas communicated too little, too late. Networks were then knocked out, which meant that the warnings that were given did not reach many of the people who needed them. In 2002, many people died needlessly, and I fear the same happened again, says Ms. Cloak. As the death toll continues to mount, emotions are raw and can easily turn. When Frank-Walter Steinmeier, the president, and Armin Laschet, the state premier of NRW, and head of the Christian Democratic Union, CDU, visited Erfstadt on July 17, Mr. Laschet was filmed joking and sniggering while the president delivered a solemn speech. Faced with a public outcry, the front-runner to succeed Angela Merkel as chancellor in September was forced to apologize and grovel. The Green Party's candidate, Annalena Baerbock, who has struggled after a strong start to her campaign, was more careful. She cut short her holiday to visit affected areas, but declined to be accompanied by journalists. Olaf Scholz, the finance minister and candidate of the Social Democratic Party, SPD, visited other areas in Rhineland-Palatinate on the same day as Mr. Laschet. He promised an aid package of more than 300 million euros, $350 million. In fact, 400 million euros has now been pledged. The right reaction to human suffering on such a scale can make a big difference to political fortunes. In 2002, Gerhard Schroeder's narrow re-election as chancellor was probably a result of his deft handling of a flood disaster. In August of that year, floods from the Elbe and its tributaries had ravaged Saxony's heartland and other parts of the east. Mr. Schroeder seized the moment to charm beleaguered Easterners. He offered cash, reassurance, and a spirit of solidarity. Edmund Stoiber, his CDU/CSU rival, remained aloof and was defeated. None of this year's candidates for the chancellorship has Mr. Schroeder's political nous. This may not matter, as the elections are still 2 months away. Manfred Gollner, the head of Forsa, a pollster, thinks the floods will have a negligible impact. It is still not clear whether most people will blame climate change for the catastrophe, he says. And even if they do, they are not sure the Greens will be able to do much about it. As the CDU has been in government for 50 out of the past 70 years, it has at least proved it can usually govern the country competently. Apart from 7 years as junior members of a center-left coalition, the Greens have no experience of national government. The Baerbock bubble has burst, says Matthias Jung of Forschungsgruppe Wallen, a pollster. Arguably, Ms. Baerbock was overhyped when she got the party's nod in April to run for chancellor, and was bound to suffer a correction. But it was compounded by mistakes of her own making, such as her clumsy handling of accusations of plagiarism. Mr. Jung's latest forecast, published just before the floods, puts the CDU at 30%, the Greens at 20%, and the SPD at 15%. Mrs. Merkel was again Germany's most popular politician. Ms. Baerbock's popularity hit a record low for her. The election campaign remains suspended this week, as Germany attempts to come to terms with an event whose human toll should not have been so high. Public awareness is a huge problem, argues Friederike Otto, a climatologist at Oxford University. Few in Germany realize that weather can kill, she says. A catastrophe can be an effective catalyst. The hope is that authorities will learn more this time than they did 19 years ago.